She collapses against the wall, sliding down to the floor, gasping through pain and muffled sobs. Her face is marked and swollen when Bill strolls in, annoyingly calm, teasing her as he dabs her cheek with a cloth embroidered with his own name. With a crooked grin, he insists he isn't some heartless monster and tells her to drop that idea fast. Sure, he admits he chases danger, but claims he always knows how to keep things under control. He calls her kid while she weakly leans into the moment, calling herself his girl. Then bang, a sudden crash shakes everything and the screen cuts to black. Moments later, an uninvited guest stands at Vernita's doorstep. The instant their eyes meet, old grudges flare back to life. No words are exchanged before the visitor smashes a fist into Vernita's face, launching them into a brutal, no-nonsense fight. Vernita slams her opponent through glass, tries to crush her outright, but the attacker slips free and drives a kick into her stomach, knocking her onto a table. A nearby stick becomes Vernita's weapon of choice, swinging it hard, but the other woman ducks, grabs her from behind, and locks her arm around Vernita's throat until she's nearly out cold. Refusing to go down, Vernita counters with whatever she can grab, dropping a shelf, then making a break for it. The chase spills into another room, turning downright bizarre as the attacker briefly fights using a piece of clothing, while Vernita arms herself with a knife. Both show off how dangerous they are with even the strangest tools. The standoff ends when the knife nearly lands its mark, forcing both women to pause, tense, and alert. A school bus pulls up outside. The sound alone cools the bloodlust. Neither wants the kid caught in the middle. Weapons vanish just as the daughter walks in, staring at the wrecked room. Vernita plays it off, blaming a clumsy mess, and introduces the intruder as an old friend. The child eyes her suspiciously, but Vernita ushers her away, saying grown-ups need to talk. Once alone, the tension shifts. Coffee is poured. The two reveal they once ran together in an elite assassination crew, where the visitor was known as Black Mamba. Vernita pleads, terrified her past might drag her daughter into something deadly. Black Mamba promises she won't settle things in front of the child, and if vengeance comes, it'll be on her own terms. Vernita apologizes for the choices that ruined everything years ago, wishing she could undo them. Black Mamba admits she's not here for simple payback. True revenge would mean total erasure. Vernita begs for mercy, even showing a family photo, but Black Mamba shuts that down fast, refusing to let emotion derail her mission. They agree to finish this at sunrise. Then Black Mamba recalls Bill once warning her that Vernita was lethal with a blade. Vernita smiles sweetly and turns toward the kitchen, too casually. It's a trap. Complaining that she deserved the Black Mamba name herself, she lunges for a cereal box concealing a gun and fires. The shot grazes her target, but it's not enough. In one fluid motion, Black Mamba hurls the coffee mug, then sends her knife flying. It lands cleanly in Vernita's chest. She drops instantly. As Black Mamba retrieves her weapon, the daughter walks in, frozen in shock. Black Mamba gently apologizes for what the child has seen, telling her that if she ever wants revenge when she's grown, she'll be waiting. She drives off, crossing another name off her blood-red list. 3 remain. Rewind 54 months earlier in El Paso, Texas. Police swarm a gruesome crime scene inside a chapel. Bodies are everywhere, 9 in total, including the bride, groom, and priest. It looks like cartel business at first glance. But the lead officer pauses over the bride's body, confused why anyone would execute a pregnant woman. He's given her name, though he suspects it's fake. Suddenly, the impossible happens. The bride coughs, blood and spit splashing everywhere. She's alive. Later, a woman with a single eye concealed behind a patch strides into the hospital dressed in pristine white, stained with a hint of red. It's Elle, another member of the deadly squad. She slips into a nurse's uniform, humming as she prepares a lethal injection. Entering the bride's room, she checks her vitals and whispers her hatred, mixed with reluctant respect. Killing someone in their sleep, she says, is practically a kindness in their profession. Just as Elle injects poison into the IV line, her phone rings. It's Bill. After learning the bride is still alive but unconscious, he orders Elle to stand down immediately. The mission is canceled for now. Bill admits they've already beaten her within an inch of her life, yet somehow she refuses to die. Still, he says he won't stoop to sneaking around and killing her while she's helpless. That kind of move would stain his code and wreck his reputation. If she wakes up, he promises to face her head-on again. Calling off the hit infuriates Elle, who loudly argues it'd be easier to finish the job right now. Bill calmly talks her down, laying out his reasoning until she reluctantly backs off. Before leaving, Elle leans in and coldly warns the battered woman to stay asleep forever, because waking up would only earn her Elle's full wrath. 4 years later, Black Mamba jolts awake from her long coma, violent flashes of the massacre slamming into her mind. When reality sinks in and she realizes her unborn child is gone, she breaks down, sobbing uncontrollably as she clutches her stomach. Pulling herself together just enough, she pretends to drift back under when a hospital worker enters with a shady client. After collecting his payoff and explaining the rules, the orderly leaves the man alone with her. The man sheds his jacket, pulls out a can of lubricant, and climbs onto the bed, convinced she's helpless. When he leans in for a kiss, his scream tears through the room. She bites down hard, refusing to let go until he collapses lifelessly to the floor. Blood splattered across her face and clothes. She tries to flee, but her legs refuse to cooperate. Thinking fast, she digs through the dead man's pockets and grabs a knife, ready in case someone walks in. Right on cue, the crooked orderly returns to collect his client. He panics when he finds the man dead, and panics even more when he realizes the woman is gone. Before he can react, she appears behind him and slashes his Achilles tendon, dropping him instantly. Dragging him to the doorway, she repeatedly slams the door against his head, demanding to know where Bill is. The man screams that he has no idea who Bill is. Suddenly, memories flood back of this man sneaking in during her coma, violating her again and again. Rage fuels her beyond the pain. With one final surge of strength, she smashes the door down on him until he goes still. She takes his keys, throws on his clothes, and escapes in a wheelchair. In the parking garage, she finds his car. Her legs are still numb, forcing her to crawl into the back seat. As she concentrates on forcing movement back into her body, visions of those who betrayed her swirl through her mind. Her hit list begins to take shape. The first name. O-Ren's story unfolds. At just 9 years old, she watched helplessly as a Yakuza boss slaughtered her parents with a blade while she hid beneath the bed, staying perfectly still to survive. 3 years later, she turned the tables, using the same weapon to kill the man responsible, making sure her face was the last thing he ever saw. When his guards rushed in, she slipped under the bed again, reliving the moment, before taking them down with ruthless precision. By 20, O-Ren had carved out a fearsome reputation as a top-tier assassin. At 25, she played a key role in the church massacre that nearly killed Black Mamba. Back in the car, a twitch in Black Mamba's toes signals hope. Slowly, painfully, control returns to her legs. She smiles, floors the gas, and drives off. Her journey leads her to Okinawa, Japan. She steps into a small sushi restaurant and strikes up a friendly conversation with the owner, impressing him with her fluent Japanese. He calls for his staff, but they ignore him, leaving him to serve her himself. He tests her language skills, correcting her as they chat, until his rival arrives and the two men break into a heated argument over who truly runs the place. Their scuffle nearly turns violent, forcing her to dodge a flying punch and later a thrown knife. She finally explains why she's there. She's looking for a man named Hattori, someone she's never met. The name alone freezes the owner in place. When she says she needs a Japanese sword, his confusion deepens. She casually explains she has some rats that need clearing out. He leads her to a hidden workshop, displaying an array of blades. One sword immediately draws her attention, but the craftsman gently redirects her to another, finer, sharper, perfect. The reflection of her face in the polished steel makes her smile. To test her, he tosses a baseball into the air. Without hesitation, she slices it cleanly in half. The man reveals himself as Hattori Hanzo. He explains that he abandoned sword-making years ago, ashamed of how many lives his blades had ended. Now, he forges only as art. Black Mamba pleads, reminding him that the man she's hunting was trained by Hanzo himself. Instantly, he knows who she's after. He writes the name on a glass pane. Bill. Hanzo agrees to help. He offers her a place to stay and tells her it will take 1 month to craft a blade worthy of what's coming. 1 month later, the sword is complete. Hattori knows he's broken his long-held promise to stay retired, but her plea cuts deeper than his resolve. He pours everything he has left into the blade, proudly declaring it the finest weapon he's ever forged, sharp enough, he jokes, to carve through something otherworldly. When he places the sword in her hands, he offers more than steel. He gives his blessing. Meanwhile, O-Ren has officially risen to power as the new head of the Yakuza following the previous boss's death. At her side sits Sophie, her closest confidant and legal counsel, one of Bill's most dangerous proteges and every bit as lethal as her boss. Sophie beams as the announcement is celebrated. Also present is O-Ren's teenage bodyguard, a volatile prodigy who ignores her youth entirely. She drinks freely, moves boldly, and radiates menace. When a man at the bar underestimates her, she casually slices him and dares him to respond. Another member of O-Ren's inner circle, Johnny, stands nearby, masked, silent, and ready to strike at the slightest signal. The mood is festive until Tanaka, one of the elder captains, slams his fist down in protest. He reminds everyone that their fathers built this empire, and accuses the current generation of disgracing that legacy. The room groans as others shout for him to stop, demanding an apology. O-Ren allows him to continue. He crosses the final line by spewing insults about her heritage, sneering at the idea of a woman, half Japanese, no less, leading them. Without hesitation, O-Ren leaps onto the table, charges forward, and decapitates him with a single, flawless strike. His head bounces across the table, horrifying the room. Sophie, however, smiles at the sight. Still standing above them, O-Ren calmly sets her rules. If anyone has concerns, they may voice them respectfully, but they'd better be prepared to change their minds afterward. And any insult aimed at her bloodline will be answered instantly, with a blade. Elsewhere, Black Mamba arrives in Tokyo. She briefly tails Sophie but decides to wait, speeding off on her motorcycle and allowing the celebration to continue for now. Later, O-Ren and her crew enter a lavish restaurant where staff bow deeply and clear a path for them like royalty. Black Mamba lurks nearby, watching, listening, waiting, but O-Ren's instincts are razor sharp. Sensing something off, she hurls a throwing weapon toward the shadows. It narrowly misses, striking the wall instead. At O-Ren's signal, the teenage bodyguard steps out to investigate. The intruder clings to the ceiling, barely keeping her balance as the girl searches the area. Finding nothing, the bodyguard returns, unaware how close she came to spotting her prey. Sophie slips away to make a private phone call. From the darkness, Black Mamba watches her with cold focus, temptation flickering across her face. Moments later, a scream echoes through the restaurant. O-Ren rushes out to find Sophie collapsing in a pool of blood. Black Mamba reveals herself brutally, severing Sophie's arm and sending her screaming in agony. Guests flee as chaos erupts. The first attacker charges Black Mamba and is dispatched instantly, his weapon snapped in half, the follow-up strike driven straight through his body. She lifts him on her blade and tosses him into the nearby pool. The next wave falls just as fast, cut down with surgical precision. Another group barely realizes what's happening before they're dead. O-Ren watches silently, measuring her enemy as Black Mamba demands more opponents. Just when it seems the room is cleared, the teenage bodyguard steps forward, grinning, swinging a chained weapon tipped with a spiked metal ball. She greets Black Mamba with a mocking wave. Black Mamba urges her to walk away, insisting this isn't her fight. The girl laughs it off, brimming with confidence, and launches her weapon. Black Mamba dodges the first strike but struggles to keep up with the rapid follow-ups. The spiked ball slams into her, knocking her down. She blocks with her sword, but the girl yanks the chain free and sends the blade skidding away. Another crushing hit sends Black Mamba crashing across the floor. She shields herself behind a table, but the weapon smashes through it, nearly landing a fatal blow. Frustration flickers as the younger fighter dominates the exchange. Black Mamba retreats across the tables, dodging strike after strike, analyzing the rhythm of the attacks. When the weapon swings again, she finally catches it, redirecting it straight back into the wall. It rebounds and slams into the girl's head. Black Mamba climbs atop her, but the girl bucks her off and reveals the hidden blades concealed within the spiked ball, escalating the fight even further. The chained weapon whips forward, slicing into her shoulder before snapping back again. This time, it wraps around her neck, the chain pulled tight and choking the life out of her. Her knees buckle, vision blurring as the air is crushed from her lungs. Desperate, she spots a broken board nearby, nails jutting out like fangs. With a final surge of strength, she drives it into her opponent's foot, then smashes it upward into her skull. The young fighter drops instantly, lifeless before she even hits the floor. But the night isn't over. Johnny bursts in next, masked warriors flooding the room from every direction. Steel flashes everywhere as they swarm her, blades raised. She grips her sword tightly, unmoved by the odds. The first attacker charges and is cut apart on impact. The rest follow, one after another, only to be carved down with single, efficient strikes to the throat and chest. She moves through them like a force of nature, even tearing out one man's eye and leaving him screaming on the floor. Johnny finally steps in himself, rage blazing. He slashes her across the stomach and kicks her backward, sending her crashing down, the first solid hit she's taken since the ambush began. From the floor, she keeps fighting, swinging upward. One overeager attacker leans in and loses his entire arm. She rises again over another corpse. An axe comes flying her way. She catches it midair, twists aside from another strike, and lets a second axe sail past her, straight into one of the masked fighters. She hurls her own axe next, burying it squarely in a man's forehead and slamming him into the wall. The rest fall quickly as she glides through them, cutting down each one in turn. One freezes in terror, she takes his head clean off. Another is split straight down the middle. The remaining fighters finally hesitate. Johnny charges again, clashing blades with her. After a brief exchange, he kicks her hard, forcing her back. Feeling the pressure, she leaps upward to the rafters to escape the mob. They're on her in seconds, but now they come one by one, lining up for death. She cuts through them effortlessly. Johnny storms back into the fray. She blocks every swing, drops back down, kills another masked fighter mid-landing, then grabs a flexible wooden beam and swings it hard, smashing Johnny in the head. She spots her true target slipping away and speeds up, cutting through the remaining guards. Johnny lunges again. This time, she drives her sword deep into his gut and drags his body along as a shield, blocking incoming attacks. Falling to the ground, she slashes at their legs, dropping them like dominoes, and makes sure none of them will ever rise again. She races upstairs, not retreating, but repositioning, cutting down more fighters on the way. The lights suddenly go out, plunging the room into darkness. Fighting half-blind, she still hunts them down, one by one. When the lights flicker back on, only one enemy remains, a frightened kid. She smacks his wrist, sending him scrambling away. "Go home," she tells him, "to your mother." Johnny returns once more, hitting harder than before. He kicks her into the railing, leaving her dangling for a moment before she pulls herself up. They clash again at the edge. With one swift strike, she slices his legs out from under him. He tumbles into the indoor pool below like a discarded doll. She turns to the survivors and gives a final command: leave. All of them except Sophie. She makes it clear the severed limbs scattered around belong to her now, trophies of the night. Then she steps outside into the snow, chasing her real quarry. The boss confronts her, demanding to know where she found such a blade. When she names Hattori, disbelief flashes across the boss's face, but she laughs it off, confident her enemy is too worn down to finish the job. Black Mamba slips off her shoes. They circle each other, trading small testing movements before the duel truly begins. The boss strikes first, carving a deep gash across her back and knocking her down, mocking her as a foolish woman pretending to be a samurai. She promises her a traditional warrior's death, but Black Mamba rises again, smiling. She lands a clean cut. The boss pretends it's nothing until blood pools at her feet. Her tone changes instantly. She apologizes for her earlier arrogance and launches one last desperate attack. A heartbeat later, the top of her head is gone. She stands frozen in disbelief before collapsing. The power of Hattori's blade is undeniable as Black Mamba exhales into the cold air. With the boss dead, she grabs Sophie, dragging her away. Outside the hospital, she gives Sophie a painful demonstration, clear and unmistakable. Talk about the deadly Viper Squad, or lose another piece of yourself. Sophie gives her exactly what she wants, becoming both a warning and a living message. The game moves forward. But there's one truth still being kept from Black Mamba: her daughter is alive. Analysis: before you understand who she is, before you know why she's doing this, you're thrown into blood, silence, and unfinished business. No backstory, no mercy, just revenge. Kill Bill Vol. One doesn't ask for your attention, it demands it. From the very first frame, the film breaks the usual rules of storytelling. You're not eased into the world. You're dropped right into the aftermath of betrayal, forced to catch up emotionally before you ever catch up narratively. And that's exactly what makes this movie unforgettable. This isn't just a revenge story. It's a revenge myth told through samurai swords, crime film brutality, and comic book exaggeration. Every scene feels intentional. Every fight feels symbolic, and every drop of blood pushes the story forward. What sets Kill Bill Vol. 1 apart isn't how violent it is, it's why the violence exists. Each confrontation reveals a piece of a shattered past, slowly assembling a larger, more personal mission. You're not just watching action, you're watching a woman reclaim her identity. In this video, we're breaking down the movie's story, themes, hidden details, and the deeper meaning behind its unforgettable style, without losing sight of why this film still hits hard decades later. So sharpen your sword, because this is where the path of revenge begins. Released in 2003, Kill Bill Vol. 1 isn't just a movie, it's the opening chapter of a carefully crafted revenge saga. Directed by Quentin Tarantino, the film was originally planned as one complete story, but its sheer scope, ambition, and stylistic boldness demanded something bigger. So the journey was split in two, and Volume 1 became the ignition point. At its surface, the movie blends action, crime, and martial arts cinema, but that label barely scratches the surface. This is a film that pulls inspiration from samurai epics, kung fu classics, spaghetti westerns, and grindhouse exploitation, all stitched together into one unmistakable style. The story moves across multiple locations and timelines, jumping between the United States and Japan, past and present. Instead of following a straight line, the narrative unfolds like fragments of memory, forcing the audience to piece together what happened and why it matters. At the center of it all is a woman known only as the Bride, a former assassin, a survivor of betrayal, a ghost everyone thought was gone. After years lost to a coma, she wakes up to a world that continued without her. The people who destroyed her life believe they're safe. They're not. Without revealing twists or outcomes, Kill Bill, Vol. 1 sets up a simple premise with massive emotional weight. A woman with nothing left to lose begins crossing names off a list, one by one. This chapter isn't about resolution, it's about momentum. It's the spark that lights the fuse, and once it's burning, there's no turning back. Kill Bill, Vol. 1 doesn't belong to a single genre, it cuts through them. At its core, this is a revenge film, but the story wears many masks. One moment, it's a martial arts epic, the next, a crime thriller. Then suddenly it transforms into a western, or even an animated nightmare, and none of it feels accidental. Each genre exists for a reason. Each style serves the story. The martial arts sequences turn violence into ritual. The crime elements ground the story in betrayal and consequence, and the Western influences give the journey a lone warrior mythic weight. The central theme driving everything is revenge, but not as blind rage. This is revenge as survival. Revenge as identity, revenge as resurrection. The bride isn't just hunting enemies. She's rebuilding herself piece by piece, using each confrontation to reclaim what was stolen from her: control, purpose, and agency. Emotionally, the film balances brutality with dark humor and stylized detachment. The violence is extreme, but rarely random. It's exaggerated to the point where it becomes symbolic rather than realistic. Blood isn't just blood, it's a statement. This movie speaks to viewers who enjoy bold storytelling, genre experimentation, and characters driven by pure willpower. It's not designed to comfort, it's designed to confront. If you're looking for quiet introspection, this isn't it. But if you're drawn to stories about resilience forged through chaos, Kill Bill, Vol. 1 hits like a blade. And as the genres collide and the themes sharpen, the path forward becomes clear. This isn't a journey toward forgiveness. It's a march toward reckoning. The story of Kill Bill, Vol. 1 doesn't begin with revenge. It begins with a mistake. A woman tries to leave a life built on violence. She plans a wedding, imagines a future, and believes she can walk away from her past. She's wrong. The wedding rehearsal turns into a massacre. Gunshots replace vows, and the woman known as the bride is left bleeding on the floor, betrayed by the very people she once trusted. She survives, but at a cost. Years later, she wakes from a coma to a world that never waited for her. Her body is broken, her life is erased, and the people responsible have disappeared into new identities, believing the past is buried. That's when the list is born, not a wish list, not a plan for justice. A death list. One by one, the bride tracks down her former allies. Each confrontation isn't just a fight, it's a reckoning. Every enemy represents a chapter of her old life, and every kill pushes her further away from who she was and closer to who she's become. The film jumps through time, revealing fragments of her training, her relationships, and the deadly code she once lived by. These moments don't slow the story, they sharpen it. You begin to understand that this revenge isn't impulsive, it's disciplined, calculated, inevitable. The journey escalates toward a brutal, operatic showdown. Swords clash. Bodies fall, and violence reaches a scale that feels almost unreal, less like a fight, and more like a legend being written in real time. But even after all that blood, the mission isn't finished. Because this story isn't about how many enemies fall, it's about who remains, and at the center of it all is one name the bride hasn't reached yet. Kill Bill, Vol. 1 doesn't end with peace, it ends with purpose. By the time the film reaches its final moments, the bride has proven something crucial, not just to her enemies, but to herself. She survived, she adapted, and she is no longer running. The final act delivers the most intense confrontation of the film, a battle that feels less like realism and more like myth. Every movement is deliberate, every strike carries history. This isn't just about defeating an opponent. It's about closing a chapter. When the dust settles, the audience expects closure. Instead, the movie pulls back. The revenge isn't complete, and that's the point. Volume 1 is designed as a test of resolve. It shows us how far the bride is willing to go, but not why she must confront the one person still untouched. That person is Bill. The ending reframes the entire journey. Until now, Bill has existed as a shadow, spoken about, feared, but never fully seen. By finally revealing him, the film transforms Bill from an idea into a destination. Symbolically, the ending represents the moment when rage turns into clarity. The bride isn't fueled by chaos anymore. She's focused, prepared, unstoppable. There's no moral lesson offered here, no demand for forgiveness. The film refuses to ask whether revenge is right or wrong. It only asks one question: what happens when vengeance becomes the only thing keeping you alive? Volume 1 ends not with an answer, but with a promise. The real confrontation is still coming, and when it does, it won't be about swords or blood. It'll be about truth. Kill Bill, Vol. 1 is loud on the surface, but beneath the blood and chaos, it's incredibly precise. Nearly every visual choice carries meaning, if you know where to look. One of the most striking symbols in the film is color. The bride's yellow outfit isn't just iconic, it's a warning. Yellow signals danger, visibility, and inevitability. She doesn't hide, she announces her presence. Anyone who sees her knows what's coming. The sudden shifts between color and black and white aren't just stylistic flair, they act as emotional filters. By draining the color from certain scenes, the film distances the viewer just enough to turn brutality into choreography, violence as art, not shock. Then there's the animated sequence. Instead of showing trauma realistically, the film translates memory into exaggeration. This isn't what happened, it's how it felt. Animation becomes a language for pain that live action can't fully express. Small details quietly foreshadow future events. Names written on the hit list, brief mentions of training, and offhand dialogue choices all hint at conflicts still to come. Even the structure of the story, out of order, fragmented, mirrors the bride's own broken sense of time after waking from a coma. The film is packed with nods to classic samurai and kung fu cinema. Camera angles, musical cues, and fight choreography echo older films, not as copies but as respectful reinventions. These references reward viewers who recognize them, but never alienate those who don't. Nothing in Kill Bill. Vol 1 is accidental. Every blade, every color, every cut exists to reinforce one idea. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's a carefully constructed legend. What makes Kill Bill, Vol 1 even more impressive is how much of it could have gone wrong. And yet, it didn't. One of the most surprising facts about this film is that it was never meant to be split in two. The original cut was so long and so intense that releasing it as a single movie would have diluted its impact. Dividing it into volumes wasn't a compromise, it was a creative decision. The lead actress didn't just play an assassin, she trained like one. Months of sword work, martial arts conditioning, and physical rehearsal went into making the action feel precise rather than chaotic. Many of the fight scenes weren't about speed, they were about rhythm. Each movement had to land like music. Some of the most iconic sequences took weeks to prepare and days to shoot, often filmed repeatedly, until the choreography felt mythic instead of realistic. Even the exaggerated blood effects were intentional. The goal wasn't realism. It was to push violence so far that it became abstract, almost surreal. Several scenes you see were reworked on set, adjusted for lighting, costume contrast, or even how a single sword swing looked on camera. And despite the film's polished style, many shots were achieved with practical effects, old-school techniques, and minimal digital enhancement. What this means is simple. Kill Bill, Vol. 1 wasn't built on shortcuts. It was built on obsession. Every frame reflects a team committed to turning a revenge story into a cinematic event, one that feels handcrafted, deliberate, and timeless. Kill Bill, Vol. 1 doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's part of a long bloodline of revenge stories, but it refuses to behave like a traditional one. On the surface, it shares DNA with classic martial arts and samurai films, lone warriors, blades instead of bullets. Honor decided through combat, but where older films aimed for discipline and restraint, Kill Bill leans into excess, turning every fight into spectacle. This isn't realism, it's mythology. Compared to most revenge films, the emotional arc here is deliberately incomplete. Many stories build toward catharsis, guilt, or moral consequence. Kill Bill, Vol. 1 does something riskier. It withholds emotional closure. Instead of asking whether revenge is justified, the film treats vengeance as a fact of nature, something inevitable once the line has been crossed. Where traditional crime thrillers rely on grounded tension, Kill Bill thrives on style. Music replaces silence, color replaces realism, violence becomes choreography rather than chaos. This makes the film more divisive, but also more distinctive. Some movies want you to feel the pain. This one wants you to remember it. What Kill Bill, Vol. 1 does better than most genre rivals is confidence. It never apologizes for its tone, its structure, or its excess. Where it may challenge some viewers is depth, because that depth is intentionally saved for Volume 2. In comparison to other revenge films, Kill Bill, Vol. 1 isn't trying to be the most emotional, it's trying to be the most unforgettable. And that's exactly why it stands apart. When Kill Bill, Vol. 1 hit theaters in 2003, it didn't arrive quietly. It made noise, a lot of it. Audiences were instantly divided, but deeply engaged. Many viewers were blown away by the film's energy, choreography, and visual confidence. Others were shocked by its stylized violence and unconventional structure, but almost no one walked away indifferent. Critics praised the film's craftsmanship, its editing, music choices, and fearless genre blending. It was recognized as a technical achievement, a director working at full creative freedom. At the same time, some reviews question the emotional weight of the story, arguing that the film prioritized style over substance, and in a way that criticism missed the point. As years passed, public opinion shifted. What once felt excessive began to feel intentional. What seemed fragmented revealed itself as carefully designed. Kill Bill, Vol. 1 aged well, not because it softened, but because audiences learned how to read it. The film now sits in an interesting space. It's not underrated, it's recognized, but it's often misunderstood. Some see it as pure spectacle, others recognize it as the foundation of a larger emotional story completed in Volume 2. That divide is exactly why the film still sparks conversation. Kill Bill, Vol. 1 wasn't made to please everyone, it was made to leave a mark, and 20 years later it still does so. Is Kill Bill, Vol. 1 worth watching? Absolutely. But not for everyone. This is a film powered by confidence. Its greatest strength lies in its fearless style, iconic action, unforgettable imagery, and a pace that never hesitates. Every scene feels deliberate, every choice intentional. It doesn't just tell a story, it declares one. That same confidence, however, is also its biggest challenge. The film doesn't pause to explain itself, it withholds emotional resolution. And it demands patience from viewers who expect closure in a single sitting. Volume 1 isn't designed to satisfy, it's designed to prepare you. If you love bold filmmaking, stylized action, and genre-blending storytelling, this film will feel like a masterclass. If you're looking for realism, moral lectures, or tidy endings, this may test you. And that's okay. Kill Bill, Vol. 1 works best when viewed as the opening movement of a larger symphony. On its own, it thrills. Together with Volume 2, it transforms into something deeper, darker, and more personal. This isn't just a revenge movie, it's the sharpening of a blade, and once it's drawn, there's no putting it back. Reviews. This movie comes with a very loud and very clear warning. If you have zero tolerance for extreme, in-your-face violence, think oceans of blood, flying limbs, and brutally graphic fight scenes, this is absolutely not the film for you. Full stop. It's easily one of the most violent movies I've ever watched, and it honestly feels surprising that it avoided an NC-17 rating. Somehow, graphic dismemberment is acceptable, but nudity crosses the line. The logic of the rating system is baffling. That said, this isn't a complaint about the filmmaker, it's more of a side-eye at how wildly inconsistent movie ratings can be. This film was never meant to appeal to everyone. Beyond the intense violence, it blends multiple niche genres. American-style martial arts cinema mixed with heavy doses of spaghetti western flair. If kung fu films, samurai influences, or stylized revenge stories aren't your thing, chances are this movie won't land for you. Personally, though, I love classic martial arts films and Italian westerns, so this hit close to home, even though I'm not typically drawn to ultra-gory movies. What really makes this film shine is how clearly it pays homage to old-school martial arts cinema, particularly the legendary work of Sonny Chiba and the Shaw Brothers era. It's packed with subtle nods and references that longtime fans will catch immediately. In fact, digging into trivia afterward only deepens the appreciation. You start to realize just how intentional every stylistic choice really is. On top of that, this might be one of the coolest movies ever made, at least in terms of presentation. The soundtrack alone is unforgettable. Eerie pan flute melodies sit right next to unexpected surf rock from a Japanese all-girl band, creating a bizarre but perfect musical identity. The costumes and characters are just as striking. From the masked army of fighters to the unhinged schoolgirl assassin, everything is wildly exaggerated, yet undeniably stylish. The film also earns major points for its bold visual experimentation. It jumps between animation, stark black and white sequences, and extended action scenes that seem to go on forever, in the best possible way. It constantly reinvents itself visually, which keeps the experience engaging even when the story itself is fairly straightforward. There's plenty more that could be said, but given how long this film has been out and how many reviews already exist, it's probably best to keep things concise. Despite its extreme violence, within its genre it's nearly unbeatable. As an action film, it's about as effective as it gets. One small, slightly humorous observation, not really a criticism: why does no one ever think to use a gun against the hero in movies like this? You'd expect at least one person in a massive fight scene to bring one along. The story itself is simple but effective. A woman known as the Bride wakes up after 4 years in a coma. On what should have been the happiest day of her life, her wedding, she was brutally attacked and left for dead. She also lost her unborn child. When she regains consciousness, revenge becomes her sole purpose. One by one, she hunts down the people responsible, crossing names off her list as she goes. Along the way, the film jumps through time, revisiting the original massacre, her near-death experience in the hospital, and the shadowy figure pulling the strings behind it all. At its core, this is a stripped-down revenge tale, inspired by exploitation-era kung fu and samurai films. The plot is intentionally barebones, serving mainly as a framework for elaborate and beautifully choreographed action sequences. While the simplicity works most of the time, it does raise the question of whether the story really needed to be split into two parts. The narrative feels stretched in places, and some sections linger longer than necessary. The director clearly pours his energy into stylistic flourishes, nonlinear storytelling, genre blending, philosophical asides, but ultimately this movie exists to indulge a deep love of action cinema. And when it works incredibly well, especially during the standout confrontations. This was the filmmaker's fourth major project, and the hype surrounding it was massive, on par with some of the biggest releases of its era. Fans of grindhouse cinema, 70s exploitation films, and classic martial arts movies will almost certainly have a great time. However, compared to his earlier work, the story is thinner and the dialogue far more minimal. The trademark verbal sparring takes a back seat, replaced by dark humor and visual storytelling. In the end, this movie succeeds exactly where it intends to. It's loud, bloody, stylish, unapologetic, and deeply rooted in the genres it celebrates. If you love action cinema at its most extreme and stylized, this is a must-watch. You can't help but feel a strange rush of excitement watching Thurman plow her way through an endless lineup of assassins, predators, and mercenaries. What really sells it is her complete physical commitment to the role. She throws herself into the punishment with a level of intensity most performers would likely shy away from. Bruised, bloodied, and relentless, she carries the film on her shoulders. Among the supporting cast, Lucy Liu delivers a chillingly restrained antagonist, while Vivica A. Fox appears so briefly you might miss her if you blink. Fans of Asian cinema will appreciate the surprise appearances by legendary genre figures, whose cameos feel like respectful nods rather than cheap fan service. The film is also packed with loving homages to cult cinema, including a standout musical cue lifted straight from classic martial arts lore. The standout sequence is undeniably the extended showdown at the House of Blue Leaves, a sprawling, outrageous action centerpiece that seems determined to push excess as far as it can go. The effects are intentionally old school, favoring practical tricks over digital polish, which gives the violence a raw, grindhouse texture. It's messy, lurid, and strangely beautiful. That said, character depth is thin on the ground. The protagonist is so emotionally distant that connecting with her feels impossible. In the end, it's best to stop looking for nuance and simply surrender to the meticulously staged chaos. One unexpected highlight is the animated interlude, which blends seamlessly into the story rather than feeling like a gimmick. This film seems to provoke extreme reactions. People either embrace it wholeheartedly or reject it outright. My own viewing experience was unusual. I watched it while keeping my son company after he'd had his wisdom teeth removed. He chose the movie, far more attuned to this kind of spectacle than I am. What unfolded felt less like a traditional narrative and more like a violent dance. If you don't completely abandon realism from the outset, the film borders on absurdity. Limbs fly, blood sprays, and each scene escalates in an effort to outdo the last. Anyone who's ever suffered a minor injury knows how fragile the human body really is, so accepting this world requires a full leap into fantasy. Seen through that lens, the movie becomes a stylized ballet of destruction, choreographed with the precision of a martial arts showcase. It resembles a splattered canvas. Numbers don't matter, logic doesn't matter. One individual cuts through dozens without consequence, and the ever-growing opposition simply expands the stage for the carnage. But who are we supposed to care about? I struggled to find a single character worth rooting for. The spectacle keeps escalating until we reach the final movement of this violent performance. Maybe it's my age showing, but I can't help wondering why this kind of entertainment resonates so strongly. Is it just escapism, desensitization, a reflection of a culture saturated with violence? Films once warned us about this trajectory, and it's unsettling how familiar it now feels. Still, there's no denying the director's visual talent. Every frame shows confidence behind the camera. I'm left curious whether that skill could be applied to a story less drenched in blood. The cast itself is undeniably strong. Thurman dominates the screen with an imposing physical presence. David Carradine gets one last opportunity to command attention, while Michael Madsen once again proves that this director knows how to bring out his best work. The supporting women are given free rein to be dangerous, stylish, and memorable. The ensemble is rounded out by international talent that adds texture and credibility to the martial arts influences. As the first half of a story originally intended to be a single epic, this chapter leaves plenty unresolved. including the deliberate mystery surrounding the protagonist's identity. The fractured timeline slowly fills in her motivations, though full clarity is postponed for the sequel. The long-promised combined version of the story still remains elusive, which is unfortunate, given how much was hinted at. Ultimately, while action isn't usually my preferred genre, this film offers more than just fights. It's a study in excess, homage, and style. At just under 2 hours, it moves far more briskly than many later works from the same filmmaker. Whether you see it as art, indulgence, or provocation, likely says as much about the viewer as it does about the movie itself. You could easily argue that this film and its sequel function as one extended story, essentially forming a 4-hour cinematic experience when viewed together. Even so, it's surprising that this first chapter walked away without any Academy Award nominations. The craftsmanship alone deserved recognition, especially in cinematography, production design, and costume work, all of which are outstanding. Uma Thurman's performance also stands out enormously. I've never been someone who automatically gravitates toward her work, but here she's phenomenal, commanding every frame she's in. Thankfully, other awards bodies like the Golden Globes and BAFTAs did take notice. Structurally, the movie opens at what is technically the end of the story if you arrange events chronologically. The initial showdown between the bride and Vernita Green establishes that several names on the bride's list have already been crossed off, including O-Ren Ishii. But suspense isn't built around whether she'll succeed, it's about how she carries out her revenge. From the start, it's clear she's unstoppable, and it's not hard to predict that the remaining targets will meet their end in the follow-up film. The chapter-based layout gives the movie a clean sense of organization, even though the timeline constantly jumps around. Normally, I prefer linear storytelling, but this is a rare case where the fractured chronology actually enhances the experience, especially on repeat viewings. It feels like a deliberate and clever creative choice rather than a gimmick. It's obvious that the director was having a blast making this film. Working again with Uma Thurman, he also used the opportunity to craft a love letter to the genres and movies that shaped him as a filmmaker. Some moments lean heavily into stylization or playful exaggeration. O-Ren's final scene, the bride sparing a young fighter for his mother's sake, her feigned cluelessness during the Hanzo encounter, or even the unexpected Charlie Brown reference. These flourishes add personality without derailing the narrative. The cast of characters is remarkably memorable. Beyond the bride herself, figures like O-Ren Ishii, Sophie Fatale, and Gogo Yubari leave lasting impressions. This film alone should silence claims that the director struggles with writing compelling female characters. Nearly every major role here proves the opposite. If there's a true emotional and visual core to the movie, it's the entire O-Ren chapter. While the opening segments, Vernita's chapter, the Wedding Massacre, and the hospital sequences, are all strong, the Tokyo portion elevates the film to another level. The climactic snow-covered duel is especially breathtaking, one of those scenes that lingers in your memory long after the credits roll. The movie also ends on a perfect note, generating enormous anticipation for the second installment. I enjoy the sequel as well and plan to revisit it in a separate review someday, though the first volume remains my favorite. Overall, this is an entrancing experience. Rich characters, a gripping revenge narrative, and stunning visuals make it an easy recommendation. I recently found myself discussing whether films overloaded with homages and references enhance the experience or risk becoming self-indulgent. The answer lies in execution. In this case, the influences are woven together so skillfully that they become something new. The range of inspirations is so broad and often obscure that seeing them blended into a mainstream blockbuster is genuinely impressive. The story itself begins with a brutal image. A woman in a wedding dress lies broken and bleeding in a Texas chapel, attacked by her former comrades, the Deadly Viper Assassination Squad. With her final strength, she tells their leader, Bill, that she's carrying his child, only for him to respond with a bullet to her head. 4 years later, she resurfaces, alive and relentless. Her first confrontation is with Vernita Green, who has traded her assassin life for suburban normalcy. The bride even attempts to spare her family from violence, offering a fair fight elsewhere. Vernita refuses, and the encounter ends swiftly and decisively. The film then rewinds to the bride's coma years, where an attempted mercy killing is halted by Bill himself, who deems it dishonorable. When the bride finally awakens, she discovers the full cost of what was taken from her. After exacting revenge on her abuser, she begins the grueling process of reclaiming her body and purpose. Her path eventually leads to O-Ren Ishii, now a powerful figure within the Tokyo underworld. O-Ren's own backstory mirrors the bride's in haunting ways, shaped by childhood trauma and vengeance. Their inevitable confrontation feels less like a standard fight and more like the collision of two legends. The story follows a woman known only as the Bride, a former assassin who survives a brutal massacre at her own wedding. After years in a coma, she wakes with a single purpose: revenge. Her path leads her to Japan, where she seeks out legendary swordsmith Hattori Hanzo, a man who swore long ago that he would never craft another blade. That vow collapses when he learns who her target is: Bill, his disgraced former pupil. Hanzo forges a sword worthy of vengeance, and with it, the Bride resumes her mission. Her first major stop is Tokyo's criminal underworld, ruled by O-Ren Ishii. What follows is one of the most infamous action sequences in modern cinema: the assault on the House of Blue Leaves. One by one, the Bride cuts through O-Ren's army, including the masked Crazy 88 and O-Ren's lethal young bodyguard armed with a spiked yo-yo. The confrontation ends in the snow-covered garden, where the Bride defeats O-Ren in a quiet, ritualistic duel. Before leaving Japan, she extracts information from O-Ren's assistant, Sophie Fatale, leading her closer to Bill. The film closes on a chilling revelation. Bill knows the Bride is alive, and so is her daughter. This film marks a deliberate shift for its director, stepping away from dialogue-driven crime stories and fully embracing the action genres he reveres. The extended battle at the House of Blue Leaves reportedly took far longer than planned, largely because it relies on old-school stunt work, practical effects, and choreography rather than digital shortcuts. That dedication shows in every frame. The movie wears its influences proudly. It draws heavily from grindhouse cinema, martial arts epics, spaghetti westerns, samurai films, and exploitation flicks, often stacking multiple references into a single shot. For viewers who recognize them, it's a cinematic scavenger hunt. For those who don't, it still works as pure spectacle. Like a densely sampled music album, the experience becomes richer with knowledge, but it never requires it. The director behind the camera is famously obsessive about film history, with an encyclopedic knowledge that borders on mythic. His work feels like a collage of everything he has ever loved, melted down and reforged into something loud, stylish, and unapologetically his own. Watching one of his films is less like sitting through a story and more like being strapped into a visual roller coaster. He doesn't aim to meet expectations, he aims to detonate them. This freedom is part of what makes the film so exhilarating and, for some audiences, exhausting. The movie is violent, flamboyant, and often shocking, unconcerned with subtlety or restraint. It also carries the director's familiar signatures: lingering shots of bare feet, bold camera angles, sudden eruptions of extreme violence after long stretches of dialogue, and a meticulously curated soundtrack pulled from across decades of cinema and music. At the center of it all is Uma Thurman, delivering what is arguably the defining performance of her career. She balances cold determination with flashes of vulnerability, turning the Bride into an iconic figure rather than just another action hero. Despite the staggering body count, the film is oddly restrained in its emotional reach. It's thrilling, stylish, and unforgettable, but not particularly moving. Tears are never the goal here. Awe is. Originally conceived as a single, 4-hour epic, the story was ultimately divided into 2 films, a decision that likely made it more accessible, while also leaving this first chapter feeling incomplete. By the end, the Bride still has one final name left on her list, and the true emotional reckoning is saved for later. Love it or hate it, this is not a film that blends into the background. It's sharp, excessive, referential, and fearless, cinema carved with a blade instead of a pen. You may never see anything quite like it again. I genuinely enjoyed the film, and I want to make that clear up front, especially since Quentin Tarantino's work often sparks an all-or-nothing reaction. That said, while I was entertained, I wasn't without reservations. From a stylistic standpoint, the movie is nearly flawless. The camera movements are elegant, drifting smoothly across interiors, while shifts into black and white and animation are used creatively and with confidence. The opening scene is especially striking. It's so abrupt and intense that it literally made me jump when the Bride's first words were suddenly cut off. Moments like this show Tarantino at the height of his visual powers. However, the film's obsession with style sometimes comes at the cost of emotional depth. It feels as though visual flair takes precedence over substance. I'm hopeful that Volume II addresses this imbalance, because if it does, the 2 films may work beautifully together. If not, this installment risks feeling hollow on its own. Ironically, the most emotionally engaging segment is the animated backstory of O-Ren Ishii. It's almost amusing that a stylized cartoon sequence delivers more emotional weight than much of the live-action narrative. While I understand that the story is intentionally incomplete and meant to be expanded later, it was still difficult to fully connect with a film so focused on visual stimulation. That said, the action sequences are undeniably impressive. The fight choreography is inventive, and the absence of heavy CGI is refreshing. The wire work feels grounded rather than exaggerated. My standout moment is the scene set in the darkened room at the House of Blue Leaves, a sequence that dials back the gore in favor of clean, striking visuals. In contrast, the excessive bloodshed elsewhere eventually becomes exhausting. Much of it seems designed to shock, yet it rarely does, unless this is your first exposure to on-screen violence. One thing that stood out during the theatrical screening was how some audience members felt compelled to laugh during the fight scenes, as if Tarantino's violence must always be framed as dark comedy. That reaction felt misplaced and distracting. The film is packed with references and homages, arriving one after another. Sometimes this works wonderfully. Sonny Chiba's chapter adds charm and humor, but elsewhere it becomes so overt and self-aware that the film begins to feel like a parody rather than a genuine entry in the genre. The opening title cards are clever, but when Tarantino leans too heavily into imitation instead of his own voice, it can feel excessive. The same inconsistency applies to the music. At its best, the score perfectly complements the mood while maintaining its own identity. At other times, it feels lifted directly from other films, pushing the experience closer to pastiche. The cast performs well despite limited character development. Uma Thurman commands attention throughout and carries the film with confidence. Lucy Liu is compelling, though her character arguably becomes most interesting during the animated sequence. David Carradine manages to loom large even when only partially seen. Sonny Chiba adds welcome humor, while Chiaki Kuriyama is undeniably stylish, even if her role is itself a reference. Supporting players like Vivica A. Fox, Michael Madsen, and Daryl Hannah don't have much to do here, but there's promise for the sequel. Overall, I had a good time with the film, but it left me slightly detached. The combination of relentless visual assault and limited emotional grounding kept me at arm's length. There are clever moments throughout, and the pacing never drags, but I found myself wishing for more heart to balance out the overflowing violence. Will I return for Volume II? Absolutely. A final line from Bill himself makes sure of that. In the end, it's a solid film, stylish, energetic, and unmistakably Tarantino, but weighed down by excess gore and a lack of emotional payoff. It blends martial arts cinema, Hong Kong action, spaghetti westerns, and Japanese anime into a bold hybrid. Uma Thurman is fierce and unforgettable, from the iconic opening shot in the wedding dress to her brutal training sequences that echo classic kung fu films. Lucy Liu is equally magnetic, and the supporting cast adds texture even when underused. With a compelling concept, striking visuals, a powerful musical score, and confident direction, the movie earns an above-average rating. Before its release, the title alone, Kill Bill, felt like a perfectly blunt mission statement. After watching it, that simplicity still defines the film: bold, stylish, and unforgettable, even if not entirely fulfilling. At its core, the movie is driven by a blunt and unforgettable mission: get revenge on the people who destroyed her life. Quentin Tarantino leans fully into his love for cinema history, blending martial arts movies and old-school spaghetti westerns into something loud, violent, and knowingly excessive. What makes it fun is how self-aware it is. Small visual jokes and pop culture nods pop up constantly, like the cereal box used during Vernita Green's surprise attack in the kitchen. Blink and you'll miss moments like that, but they reward viewers who pay attention. Tarantino also sprinkles in references to classic television and sci-fi, including a well-known proverb about revenge and a later comparison involving a familiar villain archetype. These details only age better over time, especially for fans who grew up loving the same things the director clearly does. This movie definitely isn't for everyone. The violence is extreme, limbs fly, heads roll, and blood flows freely, but it's presented so casually that it oddly fits the story being told. Darker moments involving characters like the hospital orderly and the trucker are disturbing, but they help justify the depth of the bride's anger and make her revenge feel earned. The plot itself is intentionally unrealistic, but that's beside the point. The massive showdown at the House of Blue Leaves embraces absurdity, delivering non-stop action that feels relentless and cathartic. Watching the bride carve her way toward justice is exactly what the film promises, and it delivers. While this first chapter is strong, the second part arguably completes the story even better. Together, they stand among the best revenge-driven action films ever made. This opening chapter of the two-part martial arts thriller is especially impressive coming from writer-director Quentin Tarantino. The story jumps around in time, slowly revealing why a former assassin is hunting a man named Bill. The bride, played by Uma Thurman, wakes from a long coma and begins checking names off a list, 5 targets stand between her and Bill himself. This installment focuses mainly on her recovery, her confrontation with Vernita Green, and her bloody path toward O-Ren Ishii and her army of masked fighters. The supporting cast is packed with memorable characters, from the cold and ruthless L. Driver to the unsettling Buck. One standout sequence is the animated backstory of O-Ren Ishii, depicting her violent rise to power in a stylized anime segment filled with exaggerated bloodshed. Even the live-action fights feel cartoonish at times. Characters leap through the air, swords flash, and blood sprays in almost comical amounts. The violence is so over-the-top it becomes strangely entertaining. Another strength of the film is its blend of genres. Martial arts, crime drama, westerns, and animation all collide, giving the movie a unique identity. The film earned several major award nominations, particularly for its music, editing, sound, and visual effects, and Thurman's performance helped cement her status as a major film icon. It should be said up front that this is very much a case of style outweighing substance. If the style doesn't work for you, the movie won't either. That said, it's hard not to be pulled in once it starts. The story isn't told in order, so the first fight we see isn't actually her first act of revenge. Through flashbacks, we learn she was shot in the head, left for dead, and lost her unborn child. After awakening years later, she begins her mission. Before facing O-Ren Ishii, the bride seeks out a legendary swordsmith to forge her a new weapon. Though he initially refuses, he changes his mind once he learns who the blade will be used against, claiming it to be his finest work. What follows is an extended battle sequence, where the bride cuts through wave after wave of enemies before finally confronting O-Ren herself. Parts of the fight are shown in black and white, likely to tone down the impact of the constant bloodshed. In the end, it's a brutal, stylish, and highly entertaining revenge tale that knows exactly what it is and never apologizes for it. While the violence on display is undeniably extreme, it's presented with such exaggerated flair that it never truly feels unsettling. For viewers looking for a slick, visually striking action film with solid replay value, this movie may fit the bill. The performances are dependable, and the fight choreography is undeniably impressive. The story follows an assassin known only as the Bride, who awakens after years in a coma following a brutal attack on her wedding day. Pregnant at the time and left for dead, she sets out on a relentless quest for answers, particularly about the fate of her unborn child, and revenge against those who destroyed her life. Once a member of the elite Deadly Viper assassination squad, she also happens to share a complicated romantic past with their leader, Bill. On paper, this should make her mission nearly impossible. In practice, however, the odds never really feel stacked against her. Despite their numbers, training, and reputation, her former colleagues fall with astonishing ease. Any sense of danger evaporates early on, leaving the film feeling oddly tension-free. Uma Thurman brings confidence and presence to the role, and she clearly looks the part, but the characters around her are thinly sketched and largely forgettable. Knowing that this story is deliberately split into 2 parts further drains the narrative of urgency or threat. Yes, the film is bloody. Yes, it features a tough, determined female lead, but these elements alone don't elevate the experience. The action is technically strong, yet its non-stop intensity becomes exhausting rather than exciting. While the director's trademark musical instincts are on display early, Nancy Sinatra's vocals set an evocative mood. The film gradually slips into something far more routine. For all its stylistic polish, it's difficult to find much that feels genuinely fresh or emotionally engaging. Ultimately, it left me more underwhelmed than impressed. Quentin Tarantino is a filmmaker with very specific strengths and equally clear limitations. When he leans into his talents, the results can be outstanding. When he doesn't, the cracks show. His involvement with horror-adjacent projects has rarely paid off, and his enthusiasm for certain overpraised genre films remains puzzling. Fortunately, this movie still showcases many of the things he does best. At its core, this is a revenge tale. A retired killer survives an attempted execution and decides to hunt down the man responsible, even if it costs her life. Tarantino excels at reshuffling timelines to heighten dramatic impact, something he's refined since his early work and applies aggressively here. He also peppers the film with casual, often amusing dialogue, brief cultural asides that add flavor without dominating the narrative. Violence, of course, is another signature. The body count is high, the blood flows freely, and the influence of classic martial arts cinema is unmistakable. The exaggerated gore feels intentional and almost playful rather than disturbing. Music once again plays a crucial role, blending retro themes with modern action in a way that reinforces the film's genre mashup identity. Even something as simple as wardrobe, particularly the sharp suits worn by certain characters, adds to the director's unmistakable visual stamp. Perhaps most importantly, the film is steeped in homage. References to old kung fu movies, historical characters, and genre traditions are scattered throughout, many of which will go unnoticed by casual viewers. This deep respect for cinematic history is sincere and at times genuinely effective. For fans of Tarantino's previous work, there's plenty here to enjoy. It's louder, bloodier, and more aggressive than many of his earlier films. Some moments are rougher and more excessive, but the collaboration between Tarantino and Uma Thurman remains compelling. Supported by strong performances from the supporting cast, the film stands as a technically accomplished, if emotionally distant, exercise in style, a flashy spectacle that impresses the eye more than it moves the heart. Quentin Tarantino has always had a flair for giving flashy, attention-grabbing parts to talented actors, and once again, Uma Thurman seems to push him to aim higher than usual. That said, his biggest weakness still shows. He sometimes falls too deeply in love with his own ideas. Certain sequences feel indulgent, dragging on longer than they should or tipping into self-aware cleverness that doesn't always land. The opening segment involving Vivica A. Fox is entertaining, but it doesn't quite reach the strength of the rest of the film. Compared to its predecessor, Volume 2 leans more heavily into story and character, allowing the actors more space to convey emotion. However, it also indulges in bizarre moments that feel included mainly for quick laughs rather than narrative purpose. In the end, the non-stop tricks, exaggerated chaos, surprise attacks, and relentless female-led combat don't leave much of a lasting impression. Both films certainly have their share of charming scenes and moments of low-key humor, and neither ever really slows down. But instead of feeling energized, I found myself worn out. At its core, this is a very familiar story. Revenge, a woman is betrayed, left for dead, and stripped of her future when her fiancé is murdered on their wedding day. She survives and hunts down those responsible, with her ultimate target being Bill, played by David Carradine. With Kill Bill Volume 2 arriving just 6 months later, the entire saga stretches close to 4 hours. Personally, I found the second film far more satisfying, largely because the first one goes overboard with gravity-defying martial arts action. Stylish mayhem is expected from Tarantino, but here it often feels excessive. Influenced by films like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, the movie leans heavily into sword fights, flying bodies, mid-air spins, and physically impossible stunts. While this can be fun in moderation, the balance is lost when the bride single-handedly battles what feels like an army in one extended sequence. That scene, despite its ambition, eventually becomes exhausting. Credit where it's due, though. The choice to present part of it in black and white was a clever stylistic move that helped soften the overload. Another issue is the heavy use of Japanese dialogue without subtitles, which leaves non-Japanese speaking viewers completely disconnected from key moments. If a film is going to rely so heavily on untranslated dialogue, the least it can do is help the audience stay engaged. Despite these criticisms, Kill Bill remains a bold cinematic experience. Tarantino took his time returning after Jackie Brown, and for many fans, the wait felt worthwhile. This film isn't just entertainment, it's a celebration of cinema history, packed with nods to martial arts films, exploitation flicks, spaghetti westerns, and anime. What could have been a tired revenge plot is reinvented through these influences, making the film endlessly rewatchable for cinephiles. The characters are classic Tarantino, eccentric, dangerous, and unforgettable. The Deadly Viper Assassination Squad stands out as a twisted ensemble, with Bill himself serving as a fascinating presence thanks to Carradine's performance. Supporting characters like Gogo are equally memorable, bringing unhinged energy to every scene they appear in. While the dialogue may not be as iconic as in some of Tarantino's earlier works, the film compensates with unapologetically excessive violence, a wildly grotesque climax, and a striking anime-inspired segment. Every detail feels deliberate, from small visual touches to larger stylistic choices, and the soundtrack is nothing short of phenomenal. After watching Kill Bill Volume 1, two things become clear. First, Tarantino may be the only filmmaker capable of blurring the line between homage and imitation without losing his footing. Second, splitting the story into two films was the right call. The massive showdown between the bride and the Crazy 88 alone justifies the decision, as trying to outdo that moment in a single, already lengthy film would have been impossible. In the end, Kill Bill stands as one of the most intense, visceral, and unapologetically violent films of its time, and that's meant as praise. It may not be perfect, but for lovers of film history and bold, uncompromising direction, it's an experience worth taking. After watching it once, and knowing full well I'll be returning for another viewing, I can confidently say this has been my most memorable theater experience of the year. The story centers on the bride, known within her assassin circle as Black Mamba, who is brutally gunned down by her own teammates from the Deadly Viper assassination squad. Believed to be dead, she instead slips into a coma, only to awaken 4 years later with one purpose crystal clear: revenge. One by one, she intends to hunt down the remaining members of the squad, and ultimately their leader, Bill, whose unmistakable voice belongs to David Carradine. In the first chapter, her targets include Vernita Green, also called Copperhead, and O-Ren Ishii, known as Cottonmouth. True to Quentin Tarantino's signature style, the narrative unfolds out of sequence, revealing outcomes before explanations. Unlike his earlier films, however, the plot mechanics feel secondary here, almost decorative. The movie is driven far more by presentation than by traditional storytelling, and that's very much intentional. This approach won't appeal to everyone, and the criticism is understandable. American audiences may find it shockingly violent, while martial arts fans in Asia might view the action as familiar, albeit exaggerated and self-aware. The film makes no attempt to disguise its excess. The violence is clearly stylized, almost theatrical. Calling it style over substance might sound like an insult to some, but in this case it feels like praise. That said, younger viewers and those who prefer character-driven dramas should probably steer clear. As someone who spends a lot of time watching films, I was struck by how much there is to absorb here. The direction is bold, experimental, and fearless, with Tarantino pushing his influences to the edge and somehow turning homage into something uniquely his own. I especially love films that leave lingering images in your mind, and several moments from this one have stayed with me long after the credits rolled. While the finale delivers plenty of spectacle, the sequence that truly captivated me was the animated segment detailing O-Ren Ishii's past. It contains the same bloodshed and rapid editing found elsewhere in the movie, but it also carries a surprising emotional weight. That section stands out as one of Tarantino's finest creative decisions, ranking alongside some of his most iconic scenes. Credit is also due to the animation director for crafting something so memorable. Equal praise should be given to cinematographer Robert Richardson, whose visuals perfectly complement Tarantino's vision, and editor Sally Menk, who keeps the chaos cohesive. Volume 1 delivers exactly what it promised. A wild, over-the-top celebration of grindhouse cinema that caters directly to Tarantino's core audience. Even without deep familiarity with the genre, it feels like a crash course in its greatest hits. While Tarantino's fanbase is often stereotyped as action-loving male film buffs, the presence of strong female leads, Uma Thurman, Vivica A. Fox, and Lucy Liu, adds another dimension. Their performances and physical commitment elevate the film and even give it the unexpected appeal of a revenge-driven chick flick. I only deduct 1 star because this first installment, when viewed on its own, feels intentionally incomplete. It's satisfying but clearly designed as half of a larger story. Had both volumes been combined into a single film, it might have achieved a perfect balance of mystery, mythology, and explanation. Uma Thurman's performance earned her a Golden Globe nomination, and rightfully so. Her portrayal of the bride, a woman betrayed, left for dead, and robbed of her unborn child, is both fierce and haunting. In this first chapter, although all 5 conspirators are marked for death, only 2 meet their end, setting the stage for what's to come. The film's journey takes us from suburban America to the heart of Japan, where Tarantino openly salutes samurai cinema and Hong Kong martial arts films. The editing, soundtrack, and choreography all come together to create a thrilling introduction to the larger story, with Volume 2 promising deeper backstories and emotional payoffs. If you finish both films questioning symbolism, hidden meanings, or whether what you saw was exactly what it appeared to be, you're not alone. One lingering question remains: why does O-Ren Ishii seem less driven to kill Bill than the bride? Assuming, of course, that the implication presented in the first volume is accurate. Despite my past reservations about Tarantino, particularly my long-standing indifference toward pulp fiction, this project won me over completely. Whenever either volume airs on television, I find myself stopping whatever I'm doing to watch. It's bold, divisive, unforgettable, and unmistakably Tarantino at his best. Just don't go in if you're squeamish. I once labeled Kill Bill, Vol. 1 as violent and empty. While I still stand by the first word, I now completely discard the second. After revisiting the film last Saturday night, this time alongside Kill Bill, Vol. 2, which I had never seen before, I found myself reassessing my earlier judgment. What I had previously dismissed turned out to be far richer than I remembered, to the point where I would even rank it above Tarantino's 1994 breakout film. At its core, the story is deliberately simple, almost skeletal. A wedding in the middle of the desert turns into a massacre, leaving every guest dead except the bride, who falls into a coma for 4 years. When she finally awakens, her purpose is crystal clear: revenge. She compiles a handwritten list of those responsible for the carnage and sets out to eliminate them one by one, saving the most important name, Bill, for last. Narrative depth isn't the primary concern here. Instead, the plot functions as a framework upon which Tarantino layers a kaleidoscope of cinematic influences. The film draws freely from a wide range of sources: comic books, spaghetti westerns, samurai cinema, and even video games, especially in the design of its action sequences. Tarantino's deep love for cinema seeps into every frame, expressed through playful references and affectionate nods to film history. Even the chapter titles betray this cinephilia. One segment in the second volume, if memory serves, bears a title echoing François Truffaut's La Mariée était en noir, a film Truffaut himself reportedly regarded with mixed feelings. Like several of Tarantino's previous works, both volumes are divided into chapters and presented out of chronological order, reinforcing his willingness to challenge traditional narrative structure. From a technical standpoint, Kill Bill, Vol. 1 is astonishing. The cinematography is striking, particularly in its use of bold, saturated colors, red above all. Early on, the bride drives a car with vivid red seats, an image that inevitably recalls Jean-Luc Godard's Pierrot Le Fou, where red also dominates the visual palette. While the symbolism of red in Godard's work may feel elusive or abstract, Tarantino's intentions are unmistakable. Here, red represents blood, vengeance, and death, inseparable from the bride's relentless quest. Nothing in the film feels accidental. Even characters who might initially seem like narrative padding are carefully introduced to flesh out the mythos and reinforce their identities. Across its chapters, the film exploits a wide range of cinematic techniques, all working in harmony to serve both form and intent. One of the most memorable sections is presented as an animated sequence, reinforcing the stylized tone while deepening a character's backstory. Later, during the infamous battle where the bride takes on dozens of masked opponents, Tarantino employs a clever trick borrowed from Hitchcock's Psycho, shooting part of the carnage in black and white to soften the impact of the bloodshed. The fight scenes themselves are meticulously choreographed, unfolding with mechanical precision. They're so dynamic and fluid that they rival, if not surpass, those of the Matrix series. Tarantino's fondness for graphic violence is fully on display, yet it never feels gratuitous. The exaggerated gore becomes almost operatic, transforming severed limbs and spurting blood into a form of dark entertainment. Fans of extreme cinema will be delighted, especially during the moment when the bride warns her enemies not to bother searching for their missing body parts. Even the smallest details are treated with care. The swordsmith who writes a name on a fogged window, the slow, painful effort of the bride attempting to move her toe after years in a coma. These seemingly minor moments add texture and emotional weight to the experience. Ultimately, Kill Bill, Vol. 1 delivers exactly what it promises: exhilarating, inventive cinema. As a tribute to the samurai films that shaped Tarantino's imagination, it succeeds brilliantly, offering a thrilling and unforgettable movie-going experience where style and substance flow together effortlessly. Quentin Tarantino once described Kill Bill, Vol. 1 as a kind of cinematic duck press, a dense compression of the grindhouse, martial arts, spaghetti westerns, and anime films he'd been absorbing for decades. That description fits well. The movie is loud, stylized, hyperviolent, and unmistakably Tarantino. It's an audacious revenge saga built around a character he created with Uma Thurman, who stars as the enigmatic bride, a woman whose real name is deliberately censored, reinforcing her mythic, almost nameless gunslinger persona. The premise is straightforward but brutal. The bride attempts to leave behind her life as an assassin, planning instead to marry and start anew. Her former boss and lover, Bill, responds by sending his elite international kill squad to wipe her out along with everyone at her wedding. Against all odds, she survives and sets out on a relentless quest to punish each person who betrayed her. The film follows her bloody path chapter by chapter, jumping back and forth in time in a way that's reminiscent of pulp fiction but never confusing. Tarantino blends his influences into a single, highly stylized package. Martial arts cinema, Western iconography, and anime sequences collide in a comic book-like presentation that's bold and unapologetic. The violence is excessive by design, with gore pushed to such extremes that it often crosses from shocking into cartoonish. The special effects work leans heavily into splatter, making it clear that realism is not the goal, spectacle is. The soundtrack is just as eclectic as the visuals. While original music is provided by RZA, the film also pulls from an impressive range of composers and artists across decades and genres, creating a surprisingly effective musical backdrop for the chaos on screen. The climactic sword fighting sequences, in particular, are elevated by the music into something operatic and breathless. The cast is undeniably entertaining. Uma Thurman commits fully to the role, and it's fun to see familiar faces like Vivica A. Fox, Lucy Liu, and Daryl Hannah as the targets of her revenge. Supporting roles from Julie Dreyfus, Michael Parks, Chiaki Kuriyama, and Michael Bowen add flavor, while Sonny Chiba's appearance as the legendary swordsmith stands out as a highlight. Even with a runtime nearing 2 hours, the film rarely slows down and seems determined to keep the audience energized at all times. That said, admiration only goes so far. I tried multiple times to get through this movie, partly because of Tarantino's reputation and partly because of its high ratings. I enjoy action films and don't shy away from violence, but this felt less like intensity and more like indulgence. At a certain point, the bloodshed becomes numbing rather than exciting. The revenge narrative is fine in theory, but the execution pushes credibility past its breaking point. One scene in particular sums up my frustration. The fight with Gogo Yubari. The bride is shown on the verge of death, eyes bloodshot and airways cut off, only to suddenly summon enough strength to turn the tables in a way that feels wildly implausible. Moments later, she's perfectly fine, as if nothing happened. From there, the movie escalates into a full-scale massacre that abandons even its own internal logic. What's supposed to be thrilling starts to feel absurd. By the time the bride single-handedly annihilates an entire army of enemies, the film crosses into self-parody. She begins to resemble a gender-swapped Western gunslinger, invincible, morally unquestioned, and ultimately uninteresting. Instead of offering something fresh, the movie leans heavily on exaggerated tropes and spectacle. For me, that excess doesn't enhance the story, it undermines it. As for Volume 2, my feelings are already answered by this experience. When a film leaves me repeatedly struggling just to get through its first half, I'm not left eager to continue the journey. Style alone isn't enough. I wanted more substance, more balance, and ultimately something new. After directing Time of Violence, 1994, and Jackie Brown, 1997, two defining films of the 1990s, the announcement of a new project titled Kill Bill immediately generated enormous anticipation. This would be the fourth auteur-driven feature by Quentin Tarantino, an idea that first took shape during the production of Pulp Fiction, once again starring Uma Thurman. The filmmaker envisioned a revenge epic that openly celebrates and reinvents a wide range of cinematic traditions: blaxploitation and other exploitation-era films, classic Asian kung fu cinema, Japanese samurai stories, Italian spaghetti westerns, anime, pop music, and pop culture as a whole, while embracing extreme stylized violence. What makes the result so remarkable is how seamlessly all these influences are blended into a cohesive and modern classic, filled with unforgettable imagery and iconic moments. The story centers on the bride, a highly skilled assassin who once belonged to an elite killing squad led by Bill, played by David Carradine, a group made up mostly of women. When she becomes pregnant, she chooses to abandon that violent world and begin a new life. However, her attempt at redemption is brutally cut short. On her wedding day, her former associates betray her and leave her for dead. 5 years later, she awakens from a coma, discovers her child is gone, and commits herself entirely to vengeance. Her mission is simple and merciless: to track down and eliminate the 5 people responsible for destroying her future. Her first targets include the deadly Vernita Green Vivica A. Fox and the ruthless O-Ren Ishii, Lucy Liu. Although initially planned as a single 4-hour film, the project was ultimately split into 2 volumes, released in 2003 and 2004, allowing the director to fully explore its ambitious scope. From the opening moments, the film plunges the audience into the aftermath of the massacre, showing the bride's final moments before her apparent death, before rapidly shifting into the early stages of her revenge. The fragmented, nonlinear storytelling heightens tension and curiosity, slowly revealing the history of the assassins and the motivations behind their pursuit. Viewers already know the targets are marked, but discovering why becomes part of the thrill. Tarantino immediately grips the audience with shocking imagery: a pregnant woman shot in cold blood, followed by a sudden jump forward in time to what seems like an ordinary suburban visit that erupts into brutal violence. The sequence is unexpectedly interrupted by a deeply human element, creating a striking contrast between savage combat and maternal instinct. This emotional collision adds an extra layer of suspense and discomfort that lingers long after the scene ends. As the bride regains her strength, the film exposes the horrors she endured while comatose and shows how her revenge begins even before she is fully prepared. These early acts are raw, messy, and deeply visceral, signaling exactly what kind of journey the audience is in for across both volumes. Visually and stylistically, the director meticulously recreates the spirit of 1960s and 1970s kung fu cinema, right down to exaggerated sound effects, genre-specific aesthetics, and deliberate nods to cult classics. References abound, from Akira and Bruce Lee to the Green Hornet, Japanese schoolgirl archetypes, and even subtle nods to Charlie Brown. As expected, the soundtrack, one of Tarantino's signature strengths, is carefully curated and perfectly complements each sequence. One of the film's most entertaining tonal shifts comes during the bride's visit to Okinawa, where she meets the legendary swordsmith Hattori Hanzo, Sonny Chiba. The scenes balance humor and cultural commentary, playfully contrasting Japanese and American values while still advancing the narrative. Once armed with Hanzo's iconic blade, the bride heads to Japan, where the film reaches its stylistic peak. The Tokyo set chapters deliver the most striking sequences of the first volume, including an animated segment that explores O-Ren Ishii's backstory, personally directed by Tarantino himself. This bold stylistic choice not only deepens the character, but also reinforces the film's love for genre experimentation. By the end of the first volume, it's clear that Kill Bill isn't just a revenge story, it's a cinematic collage, a love letter to film history, and a showcase of Tarantino's ability to turn homage into something entirely his own. Produced by the same studio behind Ghost in the Shell, this animated sequence fully embraces the dramatic and hyper-stylized spirit of Japanese animation, delivering an intense blend of tragedy, brutality, and visual excess. Through animation, we are introduced to the tragic childhood of O-Ren Ishii, the murder of her parents at the hands of Japanese crime lord Matsumoto, her violent revenge as a child, and her eventual rise to become a feared leader of the Japanese underworld. No one dares question either her mixed heritage or her ruthless authority. Along the way, we meet unforgettable figures such as Sophie Fatale, Johnny Moe, and the deceptively young yet lethally dangerous Gogo Yubari. Choosing animation for this backstory proves to be a brilliant decision. It amplifies the cruelty and emotional weight in a way live action could never fully achieve. The exaggerated expressions and stylized violence allow the sequence to reach a level of brutality that feels both shocking and strangely poetic. When the bride finally enters the House of Blue Leaves, a Japanese restaurant-turned-nightclub, the film unleashes a spectacular barrage of carnage. Blood sprays endlessly, limbs are severed, and bodies fall in rhythm with meticulously choreographed swordplay. The excess is so over the top that it borders on dark comedy. The infamous battle against the Crazy 88 is a visual onslaught, easily outdoing the large-scale action sequences of The Matrix Reloaded. Every wound produces absurdly excessive fountains of blood, splattering costumes and scenery in a way that is clearly artificial yet undeniably thrilling. While the mass slaughter is impressive, the most memorable moments come from the bride's clashes with O-Ren's elite fighters. Her duel with Gogo Yubari, innocent-looking in her school uniform, yet wielding a lethal spiked ball on a chain, is one of the film's most inventive and dynamic confrontations. These scenes perfectly balance grounded violence with near-impossible acrobatics, creating a visceral sense of excitement. The final showdown with O-Ren, staged in a snow-covered garden, is equally striking, using the contrast between white snow and red blood to heighten tension. The outcome is sudden, brutal, and deeply unsettling. Cinematographer Robert Richardson's work deserves special recognition. His use of black and white imagery, stark contrasts, shadow play, and shifting color palettes gives each setting a distinct emotional tone. Warmer hues define scenes set in Texas or Pasadena, while colder shades dominate the Japanese sequences. Together with Tarantino, the film constantly reinvents its visual language, switching styles, lighting, and color schemes to ensure that every major moment feels unique and memorable. Because the story unfolds out of chronological order, the audience is gradually introduced to key characters like El Driver, Bud, and Bill himself. Bill remains mostly unseen, represented only by his voice or fragments of his body, creating an effective sense of mystery. This deliberate withholding builds anticipation for the inevitable confrontation promised in the second volume. Everything here is carefully designed to leave the audience eager and slightly anxious for what horrors and acts of revenge are still to come. The film's closing moments intensify that anticipation, capped off by a chilling final line that reframes everything we've just witnessed. Tarantino skillfully uses music as another storytelling tool. El Driver's whistled tune and the bride's revenge theme have since become iconic pieces of pop culture. Though the soundtrack draws from wildly different genres, the combination feels surprisingly cohesive and purposeful. Kill Bill. Volume 1 is, above all, a sensory experience. It doesn't hide complex philosophical messages beneath its surface. Instead, it proudly prioritizes style, rhythm, and visual storytelling. Cartoonish, exaggerated, and unapologetically excessive, it never becomes dull or confusing. The film stands as a tribute to a kind of cinema that feels increasingly rare, a bold, unrestrained celebration of genre filmmaking. 6 years after Jackie Brown, Tarantino returns to familiar territory with complete creative freedom, delivering a finale that is explosive, cathartic, and impossible to ignore. You may not come here for subtlety, but you will certainly get your fill. This is a movie made for people who show up hungry for spectacle, culture scraps, and cinematic excess, and for anyone who isn't pretending to be above any of it. In other words, the masses. That includes hipsters, pop culture obsessives, trash connoisseurs, campus intellectuals, and folks watching from lawn chairs outside a trailer. Its appeal is broad and unapologetic. Will every viewer catch all the movie, comic book, television, and music references? Absolutely not. Does that matter? Not really. Do those references deepen the experience if you do get them? Sure, but they're not homework assignments. This is a film club with no dress code. Nerds and jocks welcome without irony. This is easily the director's most unrestrained film. If it skimps on his usual razor-sharp dialogue, it compensates with an almost non-stop barrage of visual madness, live-action cartoon physics pushed to their limits. And just in case anyone forgets that realism has left the building, there's even an animated sequence dropped in as a friendly reminder. Do not take this literally. Think Twilight Zone logic, not documentary truth. Viewers outside the US might call it rubbish. Americans might label it trash, sleaze, or even porn. None of that would bother the filmmaker. In fact, he'd probably smile and say you understood the joke. The title of this commentary borrows its phrase from the counterfeit swordsmith who arms our avenger, and it neatly sums up the film's deeper problem. Martial arts stories at their core are about lineage, knowledge passed down, discipline inherited, freedom earned through structure. When blades clash, it isn't really the fighters or even the weapons that matter, but the generations of masters speaking through them across time. Some filmmakers grasp this instinctively, others don't. This film doesn't even try. Instead, it reframes everything through an aggressively American lens. The setup borrows from Cold War-era fantasies. A themed assassination squad, sleek and stylized, but the emphasis is always on the individual. When the protagonist fights, it's not tradition versus tradition, it's lone wolf mythology, filtered through TV serials and wrapped in grindhouse aesthetics. For that approach to work, a guiding presence, a god, is required. It could be the cold hand of noir fate, the voyeuristic eye of the camera, the neurotic pulse of auteur anxiety, irony, dream logic, or moral judgment. The director wants all of them at once. He slices each one down to make space for the next. The result isn't focused or disciplined. It's cluttered, more collage than composition. Other films have aimed for similar heights. Some succeed because they draw from worlds their creators genuinely understand, anchoring irony with intention and control. Here, the ambition is enormous, but the execution feels like a half-heard conversation at a stylish party, clever, loud, and ultimately a little hollow. There are two kinds of filmmakers. One group works like engineers. They master existing tools, remix known languages, and rearrange familiar components into functional new machines. The other group behaves like scientists. They venture into unknown territory and return with something that didn't exist before, convincing us it always should have. Both approaches require imagination, but they're not the same imagination. Compare films that quietly reflect on themselves, stories within stories, meaning that unfolds slowly, to this one which arrives pre-digested. One invites discovery, the other serves nostalgia like a jukebox, loud and obvious. Same influences, same composer even, but wildly different ambitions. The director here is an exceptional storyteller, no question, but notice how that talent is deployed. Most of the energy goes into explaining what already happened, rearranged timelines, stylish backstory, immaculate clarity. It's impressive and easy to follow, but the best storytelling doesn't obsess over the past. It makes you wonder what comes next, and that's the lingering question this film leaves behind. After surviving a brutal betrayal on her wedding day, assassin Black Mamba awakens from a 4-year coma with a singular purpose: revenge. Armed with a list of 5 former allies, she embarks on a relentless, blood-soaked quest for retribution. Written and directed as a love letter to the filmmaker's favorite genres: kung fu cinema, sexploitation, samurai epics, spaghetti westerns, anime, and vintage crime shows, the film is a maximalist blend of everything he adores. Its scope was so oversized it had to be split in two. What it may lack in signature dialogue fireworks, it more than compensates for with visceral action and striking visual design. And make no mistake, it's drenched in blood. Buckets of it. Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill. Volume 1 marked a sharp turn in his career, stepping away from the talk-heavy crime stories that defined his earlier work and plunging headfirst into stylized, full-throttle action. This time, the focus isn't clever banter or eccentric criminals, it's pure revenge, delivered with precision and excess. Uma Thurman commands the screen as Beatrix Kiddo, also known as the Bride, a woman brutally gunned down during her wedding rehearsal and left for dead while pregnant. Against all odds, she survives, spending 4 years in a coma before awakening to reclaim her life and hunt down those responsible for the massacre. Thurman's physical presence and emotional intensity carry the film, proving she's more than capable of anchoring a violent, operatic action saga. Rather than following a straightforward timeline, Tarantino divides the story into chapters and reshuffles events, though the narrative feels more focused and less fragmented than some of his earlier films. Dialogue takes a backseat to movement, choreography, and visual storytelling. In fact, the script lacks some of the verbal spark fans might expect, suggesting Tarantino was more interested in showcasing his skill behind the camera as an action director than reinforcing his reputation as a writer. The bride's journey begins in the United States, where she confronts former assassin Vernita Green in a suburban showdown that pauses momentarily when Vernita's young daughter walks in the door. That uneasy calm shatters quickly, setting the tone for a film that thrives on sudden violence. From there, the story shifts to Japan, where East meets West in Tarantino's hyper-stylized vision. In Okinawa, Beatrix seeks out legendary swordsmith Hattori Hanzo, portrayed with gravitas by Sonny Chiba. Though retired and sworn to never forge another blade, Hanzo ultimately agrees, partly out of guilt over his connection to Bill, the man responsible for Beatrix's suffering. The result is a sword of unmatched quality, crafted specifically for vengeance. Her ultimate target in this first volume is O-Ren Ishii, played with icy elegance by Lucy Liu. Tarantino even uses anime to recount O-Ren's brutal rise through the Tokyo underworld, a technique he had never employed before. This creative detour reinforces the film's obsession with genre blending and cultural homage. The centerpiece of the movie is an extended, relentless battle between the bride and O-Ren's army of Yakuza fighters inside a restaurant. It's visually striking, wildly choreographed, and unapologetically bloody. Viewers with a weak stomach may struggle, as the violence is both graphic and prolonged. Adding to the film's darker, edgier disturbing moments involving a morally repugnant hospital orderly named Buck, whose actions push the film into deeply uncomfortable territory. While Kill Bill, Volume 1 could arguably have been tightened, especially during its slower middle stretch that serves as a calm before the storm, its highs are unforgettable. Tarantino proves he can orchestrate action with confidence and flair, even if the sharp wit of his earlier films is largely absent. By the time the movie ends on an unexpected note, it's clear that Kill Bill, Volume 1 was one of the most exhilarating films of 2003. More than anything, it shows Tarantino striving to be known not just as a brilliant writer, but as a bold and capable action filmmaker willing to reinvent himself, one blood-soaked chapter at a time. Once known as Black Mamba, she was part of the elite Deadly Viper assassination squad. When she chose to walk away from that violent life, her former leader Bill, David Carradine, took it as a betrayal. His response was brutal, sending fellow squad members Vernita Green, Copperhead, Bud Sidewinder, and L. Driver, California Mountain Snake, to eliminate her. Left for dead and robbed of her unborn child, she survives. What follows is a relentless mission fueled by rage, grief, and revenge. Her path leads first to O-Ren Ishii, now ruling Tokyo's criminal underworld. Written and directed by Quentin Tarantino, Kill Bill, Vol. 1 is a wild, high-octane experience made for fans of martial arts and stylized action. In my view, it easily outshines Kill Bill, Vol. 2, delivering non-stop momentum where the sequel slows things down. The film charges forward with confidence, overflowing with everything that Part 2 holds back on: speed, spectacle, and pure cinematic attitude. This movie isn't subtle and doesn't pretend to be. It's loud, violent, and unapologetically cool. The story is a straightforward revenge tale, but it's elevated by stunning fight choreography, outrageous villains, and Tarantino's signature flair. The dialogue works well, and thankfully the non-stop profanity seen in some of his other films is toned down here. There's no deeper message hiding beneath the bloodshed. The film isn't realistic, philosophical, or emotionally complex, and that's exactly the point. Its goal is simple: entertain, excite, and showcase Uma Thurman tearing through enemies in unforgettable fashion. The film is also packed with references and nods to countless genres and classic movies. Catching them all is practically impossible. The final act alone is worth the price of admission, a prolonged, over-the-top massacre drenched in crimson. It's absurd, excessive, and wildly entertaining. The film fully embraces what it is. Stylized martial arts chaos with zero apologies. Tarantino cranks the visual style to maximum here. From the striking anime-inspired backstory segment to the now iconic yellow tracksuit and katana combo, the imagery is unforgettable. Sword fights are beautifully choreographed and staged with almost poetic precision, while the violence reaches cartoonish extremes, limbs flying, fountains of blood spraying, and bodies piling up at an astonishing rate. There are beheadings, impalements, severed arms and legs, eye gouging, axes to the chest, and more carnage than most films dare attempt. The body count easily pushes toward triple digits. It's outrageous but so exaggerated that it becomes oddly mesmerizing rather than disturbing. One choice I didn't care for was the sudden switch to black and white during parts of the action. I found it distracting and unnecessary, especially knowing it was done largely for censorship reasons. A fully colorized version worldwide would have been preferable. With a reported budget around $65 million, the film looks fantastic. The cinematography is slick, the sets are impressive, and the action sequences are executed with confidence. The soundtrack is another major highlight. Tarantino's music choices are bold and memorable, setting the tone perfectly. The opening credits, paired with Nancy Sinatra's haunting vocals, immediately pull you in, and the music continues to elevate scene after scene. The performances are solid, though this isn't a film that relies heavily on dramatic acting. Uma Thurman is outstanding in the role, proving herself as a convincing and commanding action lead. Lucy Liu is memorable as O-Ren Ishii, and the supporting characters add plenty of flavor. Interestingly, Bill himself remains unseen for most of the film, which adds an air of mystery. In the end, Kill Bill, Vol. 1 is a modern classic. It's stylish, brutal, energetic, and completely confident in its identity. It doesn't aim for depth, it aims for impact, and it delivers. If extreme violence isn't your thing, this definitely isn't for you, but for everyone else, it's essential viewing. Once again, Tarantino delivers something bold and unforgettable. The mind behind Pulp Fiction proves that he can still surprise audiences, blending old-school martial arts influences with his own unique voice. This is more than just a tribute to classic kung fu cinema, it's a full-throttle celebration of it. Count me in for the sequel, but this first volume is where the real magic happens. Quentin Tarantino has always worn his love for cinema on his sleeve. Some critics argue that his films lack originality, and if you ignore how he reshapes and reinterprets his influences, that criticism might sound reasonable. But as a serious complaint, it doesn't really hold up. Tarantino has never claimed to be inventing something entirely new from scratch. Any artist who insists their work exists without inspiration is either fooling themselves or lying. What makes Tarantino stand out is that he's open about where his ideas come from. His films are not lazy copies of recent or mainstream movies. They're deliberate homages, love letters to the genres and films that shaped him. This movie is yet another example of that passion, and it's a wild ride. Tarantino keeps the audience firmly in his grasp, constantly catching us off guard with unexpected turns, sudden shocks, and moments that land without warning. You're never quite sure what's coming next, or how it will unfold. Visually, this may be his most extreme and blood-soaked film to date, pushing brutality to operatic levels while still maintaining a sense of absurdity and dark humor. The action choreography is outstanding, clearly inspired by classic wuxia and 1970s Chinese martial arts cinema. Even without deep familiarity with those films, it's obvious how confidently and stylishly Tarantino embraces the genre. He even blends in touches of Western influence, yet nothing ever feels forced or out of place. The dialogue is sharp and memorable, delivered perfectly by a cast firing on all cylinders. From the performances to the writing, everything feels meticulously crafted. At its core, the film is a revenge story, simple in concept but executed with flair and precision. The editing and cinematography are razor-sharp, and the nonlinear storytelling, a Tarantino trademark, works flawlessly here. While this film and its sequel differ greatly in tone and focus, both succeed on their own terms. In this first chapter, the emphasis is clearly on action, stylized, relentless, and exhilarating. The soundtrack is impeccable, elevating nearly every scene. As a visual spectacle, the film is a collision of styles. Asian cinema, anime, grindhouse, and classic Tarantino elements all fused into one bold experience. Substance takes a backseat to style, but that's entirely intentional. This is a stripped-down revenge tale, unapologetically over the top, beautifully shot, and confidently directed. Tarantino uses the film almost as an experiment, testing how far he can push visual storytelling, violence, and genre mixing. His admiration for Asian cinema is evident throughout, especially in the animated sequence, which stands out as one of the film's highlights. The action scenes and exaggerated violence contribute to a heightened sense of cool, creating an atmosphere that's both brutal and strangely elegant. Blood flows freely, but the exaggerated, almost theatrical presentation makes it entertaining rather than disturbing, at times even oddly poetic.